as a value leader, I have to earn the right with the field to show them, hey, this is what I can help you with. I'm not going to try and tell you how to sell. I might be, but I'm not going to make it obvious that I'm trying to tell you how to sell. That, this is how I'm going to help you be more effective. Once you get a win, shout it from the hilltops, because then other salespeople will see that and say, oh, I want some of that.
Hello, and welcome to the Randall Osché Podcast, where honest conversations take the lead. Each week, we sit down with entrepreneurs, artists, thinkers, and change makers to unpack how they got from there to here and what they learned along the way. Real stories, no filters, lessons earned through experience, so you can take what's useful and leave the rest. Whether you're tuning in during your commute, a workout, or while making dinner, we're glad you're here. So take a seat, relax, grab a cup of tea, and join in the conversation. Now, let's get into this week's episode.
So, David, welcome to the show. For the viewers who don't know you yet, why don't you go ahead and give a quick introduction?
Yeah, David Koppe, currently very hot off the press news, Director of Value Marketing at MinIO. Been in similar roles at previous companies like Sysdig, Lacework, ThoughtSpot, a similar role partially at MongoDB. Been in the tech industry for many, many years, over 30 years, in various roles, mainly on the vendor side, but also I did a stint as a technology leader at GD for about 13 years as well. So I've seen kind of both sides of the vendor-customer relationship. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate you being here. So I'm a value engineer. Some people listening to this might not be, and even people in our industry might not recognize what we're talking about here. So high level, what is, value selling, value engineering? What is it that we're talking about today?
Yeah, no, great question. So value selling is a fairly self-explanatory term. I think that it's for a software or hardware or any sort of vendor to focus not just on what the product or service they're selling is, but how it impacts a customer's business outcomes, right? As I always like to say, when I'm in a tech company, we don't sell technology, and you always get some funny looks, right? Of course we sell technology. Well, no, we don't. We make technology, but what the customer's actually buying is what they can do with it, right? Why does it matter? What can they accomplish? Can they grow more quickly? Can they reduce, take bottom line cost out? Can they grow revenue? Can they reduce customer churn? And that's what you want to focus on. So that's what value selling is all about. So think of John McMahon's book, The Qualified Sales Leader. Is all about focusing on what does your product or service deliver to the customer, because ultimately that's what they're actually buying. So that's value selling. There's methodologies around it, MEDDIC, MEDPIC, a couple of different iterations. Force management, command of the message is very much about enabling to focus on that. And value engineering or value consulting is sort of the specialized practice to help build that muscle in a sales team. A value engineering and value consulting team can look very different, but that essentially is the essence of the role, is a sort of that subject matter expert on how do you measure and quantify the value for a customer or a prospect.
And the value would be the outcomes that the solution produces. So decrease expenses, exactly. Increase revenue, improve efficiency, reduce churn, etc. It struck me when we started to go down this part of the conversation that value selling, you said, is self-explanatory, which I think it's a pretty simple concept to understand, but in practice, I think people struggle with it. I think then that's by nature that organizations have value consultants or value engineers to help solution consultants, account executives be able to sell the value, because they rely on functions and features of the solution more heavily than the outcomes that we were talking about, that we refer to as the value of the solution. So maybe a little bit in your opinion, why is it challenging for organizations to be able to articulate what the value of solutions are, and why do so many organizations struggle with that?
I think there's absolutely solutions out there for which the value proposition is just self-explanatory. Right, a disruptive technology, a new type of storage that's orders of magnitude cheaper or faster than something else. People just inherently get that. But there's other solutions, coming from the cloud security space like what's the value of solution X versus solution Y, people think about cost, and obviously cost is a big part of that value. But, what's the value of a security solution? Is it that I didn't get hacked today? Is it that I don't get hacked in the next week? Inevitably, I will get breached, but is the value that I can recover, I can detect that breach more quickly and recover in an order of magnitude shorter period of time. I think when you get into outcomes that customers actually care about, it can get very nuanced and very complex. And it sort of depends on the type of salesperson you have as to whether they can hold that conversation themselves or if they need somebody to come in and have those conversations. A value proposition can be something fairly straightforward, or if you have to get into a lot of like productivity calculations and NPV type calculations, those sort of financial metrics, then I think a specialized team or practice really starts to be very, very powerful. But if it's something that you can ingrain into the sales team to say, not just talk about use cases and features of what our solution or service does, but why a customer should care. If you can sort of drive that discipline, then I think it's a lot easier to move to that mode of selling.
Yes, I think especially so, and we've talked about this before, in a competitive marketplace, and I think your answer alluded to this, is some solutions, it's just evident what you're going to get out of it because there's that much better of a value proposition versus the competitor or a legacy alternative. But in a much tighter, depending on what solution you're trying to sell, in a much more competitive marketplace where the discrepancy between solution A and solution B might be marginal, then this probably comes into play for the executive buyers to make a decision and put more weight on some sort of analysis or business case. Fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, most industries, most sort of segments are by their nature very competitive. And if they're not now, they probably will be very soon. And that's why I think focusing on the value you're delivering to a prospect and a customer is that much more important, because switching costs today are so much lower than for many solutions. Some solutions not at all, but in many cases, if I'm a customer and I'm using solution X for something, if I decide I don't really like it or I see something better, in many cases, it's a subscription. I can just say, yeah, you know what? I'm not renewing. I'm going to go with something else because it's cheaper, right? The unit economics are cheaper. So for that vendor, making sure that you're having a value conversation is really important, because otherwise it comes down to cost. And with most software, cost reductions are a stroke of a discount pen. So it can be pretty challenging. So it is very sort of industry and use case dependent.
Yeah. Price is only an issue in the absence of value. So the stronger your value proposition is, the less likely you are going to have to rely on that discount pen, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Walk me through what you would consider like sort of a value engagement. So say you're a value engineer, you're supporting a sales team, maybe like a solution consultant, an account executive, you enter the deal. Tell me about how that looks from like the entry point, and maybe how you qualify a deal that you want to invest your time in, and then take us from there.
Yeah. So that can look very different. It can look good and it can look not as good. Unfortunately, in too many cases, an engagement looks like the salesperson, the solution architect have been working with the customer for a while. They've done demos, they've got interested, they've nailed down a list of use cases. They may even have done or be in the process of doing a validation event to validate success criteria. And then they bring a value engineer in to say, hey, in the imminent future, we're going to be putting a proposal on the customer's desk. So we need to document the value, right? So here's the price tag for the customer and here's the value you're getting. That's a very risky way of engaging, because one, you've already invested a ton of time. How many meetings have you had for that opportunity? How much time and resource, expensive resources, have you invested in doing the validation event? And what if nothing comes from it, right? You're potentially risking wasting a lot of the company's money. And secondly, customer probably knows exactly why you're trying to build a business case, because you're going to put a proposal on their desk and you're going to use this business case to defend the proposal. So if you're a customer, why would you participate in that process, right? So that's a kind of a bad example of engagement. What is a much healthier level of engagement is that the value consultant, the value engineer, or the value content is factored into a deal much, much earlier, as early as possible. That we're factoring in the potential value a customer could get from our solution into the sales conversation as early as possible. I would argue that if you're calling an opportunity qualified, but you don't have a sense of what the business case is, I would argue that's not qualified, because, whether the customer is actually going to buy it is a pretty important success criteria, qualification criteria, right? So what's a lot healthier is it's not necessarily a value engineer getting involved. It's at what point do you start talking about value? And that's one thing I've learned over the last year, is making sure that even your product marketing content and your proof points and your case studies are not just about the value, but have a very, very clear value message within them, is really important, because that means that your sales team, your field team are able to use those proof points and use that to sort of dig into what a customer's value proposition and business case might be much earlier, right? And that's part of the trick here, is you want to make that content available to the field so they can self-service and they can run with that. And then the value engineering team is there to kind of supplement, help generate that content, but then come in as a subject matter expert to say, hey, I presented this proof point to this prospect. They really like this idea of influencing metric A, B, and C. Can you help me make a version of that for them? That's a really good kind of engagement model. And the other thing that's really important about that is, I forget the actual metrics here, but it's something like 80% of education of a customer about a solution is done without you even knowing. Prospects will go to your website, they'll do Google searches, look at, Gartner Magic Quadrants, and they will do their own research on a solution before they even talk to you. So value has to be embedded in the content that they see, so that they already start to form a perspective of what the value they will get from your solution is. So factoring value in earlier in the sales process, whether that's through generated content, whether that's through some sort of value platform that helps the field have that type of conversation, or if it's a value resource being brought in to help with that conversation, then it'll look a little different. But that's a much healthier and a much more productive way of engaging.
I would agree. We always want to identify the ideal sort of scenario, but we don't often live in the ideal world. So, right. But it's always nice to have that North Star that this is what an ideal would look like. Let's try to aim for this. And we can certainly engage in less than ideal circumstances, but let's always be working towards that ideal circumstance. I would say always be value selling, whether or not you have a value engineer team or whether you're engaging with a value engineer team, organizations and executives. By the outcome, that's the value, not necessarily the solution.
Exactly. I was actually talking with another value leader, one of my peers, quite a few months ago now, and we were laughing because he said, my goal is to put myself out of a job. And my goal is to build a value practice and deploy a value platform that is so comprehensive and so easy to use that you don't need a value leader and a value consulting team, that we put it in the hands of the field and they can sell using what we put together. Right? Maybe you never get there, but that's really the perspective, because the days of having, when I was at BMC, we had dozens of value consultants who would sort of roam the country doing this for customers. But that was a very different world. Software-wise, perpetual license, pretty big deals. You could afford to have a large ecosystem of roles to support the deal. It's very different now, where you're looking at probably an annual subscription that's a comparatively lower dollar amount. You can't afford that sort of model. So the self-service and the education and enablement side of it is really, really important.
You said a little bit earlier about having the value of the solution embedded in your ecosystem, right? Having your employees, regardless of position, be able to articulate what that is, having it embedded in your website, because like you said, 80% or so of the education your customers get is not from you and information that you provide them. So making it readily available to them so they can go do their own research, get comfortable with it, understand the solution, the value that it's going to add. How, in your experience, has this been a challenge, and B, if it has, how have you tried to overcome it? Organizations operate in silos. It's the nature of the beast. If you have a large company, you're going to have different people doing different roles, and they're going to have certain responsibilities. That's one silo. And then they're going to work with somebody else in a different silo. So breaking down those silos has always been challenging, because everybody has their own remit, everybody has their own goals and objectives, everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses, depending on what the role is that they're supposed to do. But if you're talking about selling a solution, that's why organizations exist. They exist because they create the software and they want to sell it to another business. So at the end of the day, software company has to sell software. That's the remit of the software company. And if we signed up to sell the value of that solution, I would agree with you that the bedrock of our messaging should be about the value that the solution will provide. And in my experience, that's been a challenge to get everybody on the same page because of those silos and because of the size of some organizations about positioning of that value. How do we talk about it? How do we articulate this? Where does this information live? So we're talking from like account executives, solution consultants, marketing, product marketing, enablement. What's enablement? Telling all these people about how we're selling the solution. So how do you maybe break down those silos, or what would your advice or recommendation be so we're all singing from the same song sheet, so to speak, when we're talking about what the product does for the organizations that we're selling to?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's where conceptually, off the bat, value selling is a fairly self-explanatory concept. And I don't think anyone would say, no, we shouldn't do that. But how do you actually make it happen? That's where it gets really complex. I think the first thing I'd mention is executive sponsorship. Your CRO, maybe even your CEO, needs to drive this and say, we are going to sell the value of our solution, because ultimately the CRO and CEO, everybody rolls up to one of those roles. So it has to be a top-down expectation that's set. I think reporting structure can play into that, and that's going to vary based on how the organization is currently organized. As a value leader, I've reported into customer success, into pre-sales, and then through pre-sales into sales, and now into marketing. So it kind of depends on where your company's at and what their level of value maturity is. I think there's also kind of an operational perspective of, should this be kind of a value management office that just reports into an operational function? If you report into sales or pre-sales, then it's perceived as a sales or pre-sales function. If you report into customer success, it's perceived as a customer success function. And it's not. It should be pervasive. So a value management office that kind of sets the expectation, and all things value management rolled into that office, that's another way of looking at it. And, different organizations will place value in the most appropriate place. So there's most definitely not one answer to that question. But I think that's the important side, is making sure that you're at least making steps to embedding value pervasively across the organization. And I think what falls on the value leader is the onus to show people what good looks like. So in previous roles, I've done a lot of work around, our proof points. Any tech company probably has loads of proof points of where a customer was doing something different, they hated it, they used us, and it was all unicorns and rainbows, right? That's your standard tech proof point, right? But, how do you measure that? If I'm a prospect reading this, I'm like, okay, I have no way of understanding whether what you just said will help me. Whereas if you're saying we help them shrink the footprint of their infrastructure by 36%, resulting in an X million saving, and they're able to accelerate deployment by 4X, okay, that's something that I can kind of relate to and say, okay, well, now I see what they accomplished. You're already telling me how they accomplished it. So now as a prospect doing my research, I can kind of map that into my world and say, oh, okay, yeah, that definitely sounds like something that's useful. So making sure that you're wrapping that discipline around existing processes so that the organization itself can then say, oh, okay, now I see these proof points are so much more effective. So that's how we're going to do it. And we'll always ask about these business outcomes, but the value team has kind of helped influence that. As you engage on sales opportunities, I do think any value leader, any value consultant has to acknowledge that we have to earn the right to be part of a salesperson's toolkit, if you like, right? Salespeople have a lot on their shoulders, right? Their livelihoods, their income, and the future of the business is on their shoulders, right? They're not just going to bring in some new resource just because somebody told them to, right? So as a value engineer, as a value leader, I have to earn the right with the field to show them, hey, this is what I can help you with. I'm not going to try and tell you how to sell. I might be, but I'm not going to make it obvious that I'm trying to tell you how to sell. That, this is how I'm going to help you be more effective, right? And there's industry metrics around organizations with effective value selling skills sell X% more quickly, win Y% more of deals, and discount Z% less, right? There's positive sales outcomes that are out there, but you've got to kind of go through that and earn that right with a couple of people. And then once you get a win, shout it from the hilltops. get on the all hands call, get on the, recorded into your enablement system of choice, walking through how this great opportunity landed with a material impact by the value organization. Because then other salespeople will see that and say, oh, I want some of that. Now I get it. Let me start bringing them in. So you've definitely got to earn the right. And I think from a case study proof point perspective, that's not just within marketing. I think also within customer success. It's important to do that because ultimately, if you're working with an existing customer and you're helping them focus on the value that they're getting from you, that helps you tell a better story to other prospects, but it also helps make sure that they're a happy customer, that they recognize they're getting value, which de-risks renewals and hopefully drives NRR as well. So there's a few different ways to kind of establish the practice and mindset.
Let's take a quick break from today's episode. If you're enjoying the conversation, take a second to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you're tuning in. We'd really appreciate it. You can also find us on Instagram at Randall Osché. That's RANDALLOSCHE. And check out more at podcast.randallosché.com, including show notes and other resources from today's episode. All right, back to the conversation.
So I want to get to maybe the customer value journey from like a pre-sales to post-sales and how you think about that. But maybe that would be a follow-up question to this of standing up, say, a value practice, say like their software company exists, relying on the account executives so far. They want to refine their value selling methodology, or they want to embed that practice into the organization. So they go out and they hire somebody like you. You come in. What does that look like? How would you stand up a value selling organization?
I think, there's a certain level of maturity around value selling that I'd want to look at. If they were kind of complete novices and really weren't doing anything approaching value selling, then that's a very different proposition. And in that case, you absolutely need top-down leadership. I've actually been in situations where maybe that wasn't the case. And it's very hard as somebody, lowish down on the totem pole to try and drive that type of cultural change without support from leadership. So that can be challenging. But I think typically the first impact you can have is on sales. So find a couple of salespeople who maybe have worked with a value team before and have an opportunity that they feel is ripe for a value engagement, and work with them really on a really detailed basis. Don't get too caught up on, we're going to work on the largest deals over 150K. I did that once, and the very first deal I was working on was 149,000. And I'm like, oh yeah, maybe we shouldn't be drawing these artificial lines, right? Just take what you get. Work with anybody to help them get a deal over the line so that you've got that proof point of your team to show the value that your value team can bring, I think is a really good way, because then I think the sales organization at the very least will understand that, hey, this is how value can help accelerate this deal, how it can help fend off the competition, how we didn't have to discount the heck out of it because we had a solid business case, etc. You can kind of put that in black and white, and that's a really good first place to win. And then, as I said, the kind of the proof points case studies, go through any existing customer stories and just sort of say the so what type question. You would never actually say that to a customer, but it's sort of saying, so what, right? Oh, you're using us instead of something else previously. So what? Like, oh, you saved money. Oh, well, how did you save it? Like, was it just about cost? So if another solution came along tomorrow that was 5% cheaper, you'd dump us and go with them? Well, no, because this. Okay, so what else are we giving? Like, and really kind of dig into ultimately, I like to think of it as, why would a CFO and why would a CEO care? They're not going to care about the details of what your tech does and how it works. They're going to want to know, and does this give me a story to tell my shareholders? That's sort of the perspective that you want to look at as well.
And, what you just said there, getting back to two of your previous points, is a value engineer showing, regardless of threshold of the deal you're working on, taking the opportunity to like show what good looks like and earning the trust of the people you're working with along the way. Like, they don't know you, you don't know them. You got to learn and grow together, find the opportunity, learn and grow together. What would a CEO or CFO be interested in when they're trying to make a decision about software to help run their organization? What are some things in your experience they look for?
I mean, if you're a CEO, it's about growing the business. Is this company's a retailer, how are they going to sell more product, right? If they're a financial services firm, how are they going to grow their margins, grow their customers, grow their revenue per customer? Ultimately, it comes down to revenue for pretty much everybody. The challenge is, how does one little piece of a technology stack, how does that influence revenue? That can be a tricky conversation. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, buy us and you'll sell this much more, right? In most cases, that's just kind of a non-starter of a value prop to make it that black and white. But if you're understanding where is this customer, where is the CEO in their journey, what are their priorities as a CEO for this business? Mergers and acquisitions is a great example, right? They want to grow by acquisition. Well, can your solution help them assess and onboard acquisitions more quickly? That's kind of material to this company's growth strategy. If it's expanding overseas, can your solution help them meet those international regulatory requirements or speed that expansion and so on? And if so, how, right? Is it because they want to expand internationally, so they're moving from more in-house, on-premise infrastructure to public cloud? Well, does your solution help them adopt the public cloud more quickly and more effectively? Does it give them portability so that when you're looking at data residency requirements and so on, does your solution help them leverage the public cloud, but mitigate some of the risks around, my data has to stay in these locations, or I'm going into a different part of the world and I've got to use a very specific cloud for that part of the world. Giving customers cloud portability, cloud agnostic capabilities is important. Just understanding kind of what the big initiatives for the CEO are, and then putting your solution in the context of those initiatives.
Yeah, that's an important point that we didn't talk about yet, but I always find it wildly important to understand whoever you're talking to, like whoever you're engaging with as the client or the consumer, what's important to them, whether that's the champion, the buyer, the CEO, CFO, if you get those meetings, but what are they trying to accomplish? Because if you can align to that, then you have a better opportunity of winning the deal. If you can align to that, better opportunity of winning the deal, and then back that up with the value that you're going to add and how the solution does that, that's the winning proposition. What do you think the value journey for a consumer should look like? Customer wants to buy a solution, you get engaged as a value engineer from the pre-sales side of things. How do you think the customer value journey should look from pre-sales to post-sales through like customer success through to renewal?
So for me, the value journey should start, like I mentioned, fairly early on, and it should be like a 30-minute kickoff. I want to meet with the person the account exec is saying is our champion, and I want to understand their priorities, understand what their business case is going to need to look like. And honestly, I'm kind of testing them to see if they're going to be a willing and eager participant in the process, because ultimately, as a vendor, you always think it's our business case. It's the customer's business case. It's the champion is going to take this business case and try and get this deal done. So you've got to be thinking about early on, what does good look like to you, right? And you can bring, you've got to come in as a thought leader, as a subject matter expert to say, hey, this is how we typically see customers justifying an investment in a solution. This is one type. This is another type. These are some other ideas. What do you think, right? So I want that 30-minute meeting to get aligned. And basically what I'm looking for is this person to say, okay, I understand what you're looking to do. I'm really keen to do this. And ultimately, based on what I've seen and what I know about my company and my management, this is what we need to show, right? That's your end in mind, right? You started with the end in mind. Then it's a case of kind of making that happen. And then it can be, I always try to position this engagement as a fairly light lift, right? You don't want to give the customer the impression that it's going to take 3 months and 150 hours of interviews, right? If it needs to be, that's perfectly okay. But in most opportunities, that's not the case at all. You want to make it seem like, hey, we've got a bunch of material we can bring in here. It can be really easy. It's like not a lot of time. We're going to do all the hard work. Just give us access to a few people and we'll do this for you. It's a value add service to the champion. So based on what they need the business case and justification to look like, that'll then tell you who else you need to talk to. Then, again, simple 30, 45, 60-minute meetings with one or two people. Ideally meet with people individually rather than, one call with 6 people on it, because just natural human dynamics, you got a team of 6 people, 1 or 2 of those people are going to be, I don't want to say the control freaks, but they're going to be they're going to dominate the meeting, right? And you're not going to hear the perspective of the other people. And you really want the unvarnished truth about what's their current state, what are the current problems, what do they really need, and so on. You want to garner as many perspectives as you can. And then you go away and do the hard work with the spreadsheets, the presentations, and the calculations, etc. And then bring it back to your champion and say, hey, based on what we talked about and based on talking to your team, this is what we have. How does this look? And then kind of maybe a couple of iterations to tweak it. That's what, to me, a value engagement ideally should look like. And then that justification goes along with the actual proposal for the deals that hopefully get executed. Now, a lot of people stop there. And that's a mistake, because think of that as a version 0. You just made some promises to this champion about the value you're going to deliver. You really should focus on delivering on that, right? And that's where the customer success piece comes in. So, and I think it's not just kind of an honesty perspective. I think you're really kind of missing the boat. If you've just done all this work, you've documented in probably fairly decent detail what this customer's success looks like, give it to CS and give them, hey, this is what we're looking to deliver. We're not just looking to deploy software and install agents and set up UIs and train users. Yeah, that's just a means to an end. But ultimately, this value proposition, this business case is what we're looking to deliver. Let's make sure we're doing that. And that can be really, really helpful in showing the customer, hey, we didn't just do this as an exercise to get you to sign on the dotted line. This is the foundation of our ongoing relationship. And so that initial business case should then morph into a success plan, a value realization, a quarterly business review, whatever mechanism you use to deliver that. It should then be sort of that common thread that you're having a conversation based on for years to come. And the value proposition potentially will change. Don't be afraid of changing it, because that initial business case is probably going to be pretty financially focused. But over time, you almost need to kind of not forget about that, but to kind of evolve that into kind of what are the KPIs of the business that we're actually looking to influence. And the financial side is still there, but it's more around kind of the efficacy aspect of it that then gets baked into the post-sales journey with customer success. That would sort of be the kind of start to finish.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's challenging to do, like pretty simple concept, but challenging to do.
All the best things are, right?
Yeah. I had a thought. You mentioned something there that I never thought of doing, but scheduling individual calls with the consuming team. My career up until I became a value engineer was in finance, wealth management, so it was a different world. Since 2022, I've been a value engineer, but I've just always just scheduled whoever I get the audience with, that's who I'm doing my discovery with. But like, yeah, it makes complete sense what you just said. Ultimately, you have maybe a team of people, you have one supervisor, 3 subordinates, and the only person doing the talking is the supervisor.
That's the worst case scenario.
If you have a good supervisor, they're prompting their team to speak up, but that also doesn't happen. It's just a simple solution: schedule separate calls.
And if you're a team member and your boss is saying this is how things work, are you really going to jump in and say, actually, it's not always like that. This is how we really do it? You'd like to think that they would, but they're naturally going to defer to them. So yeah, individually is much better.
And how oftentimes does the supervisor so far removed from what's actually happening that they don't have an educated opinion on what's going on?
There's nothing negative here. It's not like anyone's trying to cover anything up. It's just the people who do the work on the day-to-day basis, they're closer to the coalface and they know the ins and outs. The supervisor knows how things should work and how they want them to work, and that's fine. But what you're actually looking to do is quantify real. What is actually the current state? Not do we want it to be? If you think in terms of kind of command of the message, the supervisor is probably going to know, we're going to understand the desired state. The people who do the work are going to be the current state. You want the current state. We're trying to help you get to the desired state. So there is an element that plays in as well. Now, we don't always get to do that. And in some cases, it's okay. You don't necessarily absolutely have to do that. Sometimes if the justification you're doing is a fairly high level kind of what I'd sometimes refer to as an outside-in type analysis, where you've got some general estimates just looking to kind of tweak them a little bit to give kind of an illustrative value assessment, then maybe it's okay to work with the team and just kind of say, is it 1 million or is it 1,000? That sort of thing. That could be okay. But if you really want to get to the truth about how do things work, individual interviews are much, much more preferable.
Yeah. So obvious. Like you said that, and I'm thinking, you're such a dummy. Me, I'm the dummy.
Yes.
Before we move off sort of the value engineering topic, any final thoughts on the state of value engineering, the role itself that you want to close?
I think for me, it's been a really interesting journey. I've been familiar with the role for close to 20 years now, even from when I first started at Blade Logic, the business value assessment type process. It wasn't something that I anticipated getting into, but I think it's actually been a really eye-opening experience. And I think it's something I would suggest that every software company, and potentially in some way, shape or form, every vendor needs to think about selling the value of what they do. The challenge becomes, how do you do that? Especially if you're a small startup and you've got like 50, 60 people. Are you really going to dedicate a headcount to a value person to do this for you? That's where it becomes a little challenging. I think there's a whole kind of cohort of companies that want to sell more effectively, and that's ultimately what value selling helps you do. But having the justification to spend a headcount on it versus having another sales rep versus having another engineer, that can be the challenge potentially.
Yeah, I would co-sign that. I think the nature of the beast is that technology companies are started and run by people that have a technical expertise. So they rely on that, and it's neither good nor bad. But if you're trying to sell the software, we're not trying to sell your technical expertise. Your technical expertise is what created the product. Like we've mentioned before, it's not those functions or features. It's about what the solution is going to do for the company. So, I think a lot of these organizations get into the situation where they might have a great product, but they're not sales people, or they're not sales experts, or they're not value engineers. They're great at the technology piece. But I think that's why value consulting department inside a company is important and necessary at a lot of software companies for that very reason.
It is. Yeah. And I think you can look at, maybe there's an internal resource that can kind of be a part-time value person, pre-sales leader, a sales leader, enablement, whatever it is. I think it's important. It's the discipline and the practice is the important thing, not necessarily having people do it. And as I mentioned, if you do it well, as a value leader, you potentially are shrinking your team and putting yourself out of a job, right? Because ultimately the best scenario is it's just part of how the company operates. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to hire a business value consultant. It's how do you embed the practice and that way of thinking in your organization and drive it to the field? That's what you're looking to solve.
Yeah, and if they have any questions about value consulting, they can just watch this episode and they'll have all the right answers.
Yeah, exactly.
I always ask this question, but what's the most influential book you've ever read? And maybe you want to give two answers, maybe for like personal most influential book and then maybe business most influential book.
Business, I think I mentioned it before, The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon. I think that really summarizes kind of the essence of value selling and why it's important. I think there's also one I actually have here, the Evolved Selling by Tom Pissell, that's very specifically focused around value selling and kind of looking at kind of not just ROI, but truly understanding value for your customer. Personally, for me, Lord of the Rings was an awesome book. I read all 3 volumes, put it down, and I was so impressed. I picked the first one up and started reading it again. I read it cover to cover twice, but not on the same day, just to be sure. I repeated it several months. I just love the creativity and just thinking that Tolkien invented this entire world with its own history and its own languages and mythology was just like, wow, what an incredible creative effort. That just really, really impressed me. It wasn't just a story about something that happened. It was just this entire universe that this person created. It was just incredible.
I think that that's maybe a different topic for a different conversation, but I think some roles that you have in life, you start thinking as a producer and not as a consumer. And when you're reading that book, yes, you're being entertained, but you're also thinking of it from the creator standpoint of like, how did we get here? And I think that when you can think about things in both ways, I think it enriches your life. But
that's a good point. Yeah.
Next question, in career or life or both, what advice would you give your younger self?
I'm very, very happy with how my career has played out. I really can't complain. I've worked with some amazing people. I've learned a lot, been a part of some fantastic companies. I almost hesitate to say this because I think one of the things that I've noticed in my career is, I don't want to say I'll go with the flow, but I've gone with an opportunity that feels like the right thing to do, even if it's sort of a little bit of a turn left. as I mentioned, I was at GE for 13 years. I thought I was a GE lifer. And then this incredible opportunity came up at Blade Logic. I'm like, that sounds really cool. Let me do that. And then I went there, and that was a phenomenally awesome move and really kind of taught me a lot for the remainder of my career. So I think I would tell myself, don't be afraid to make changes, but maybe I should have thought about, where do I actually want to be in 10 years or 5 years, right? So I think I'm happy with kind of the changes I've made, but it didn't feel like there was a plan.
Right.
Now, I can't complain, and it's working out pretty well, but I don't know, maybe that was the secret. Don't have a plan.
Yeah.
Just see what the world throws at you and make the best of it.
I think like not being afraid to make changes is important. I think always starting with the end in mind, just like a business case. Where do you want to end up? But remaining flexible enough to embrace opportunities that you might not have been expecting. And then if anybody listens to this, David, and wants to reach out to you, where might they be able to find you, or email, whatever you're comfortable sharing?
LinkedIn is probably the best place. David Koppe, Koppe. There are a few other David Koppes.
We'll include a link.
I was somewhat surprised to find that out. But that's probably the best place. And I'm Koppe David on Twitter as well.
Got it. We'll include the links in the show notes.
Awesome.
Well, David, thank you for your time today. Thanks for re-recording this episode with me.
All right.
We'll throw some shade at Riverside, but it was probably user error on our part.
Sure.
Great conversation. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you. Great questions, and great to chat with you again, Randall.
Yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Okay, thanks. You too. Bye.
And that wraps up today's conversation on the Randall Osché Podcast. Thanks again to our guest for sharing their time, knowledge, and lessons with us. If the episode brought you any value, the best way to support the show is to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform. That helps us reach more people like you. You can also visit podcast.randallosché.com for blog posts, full transcripts, and other episode resources. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep moving forward.